The Stonewall Inn, located in Manhattan, New York, served as a safe place to the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. It was home to many LGBT youths who were neglected by their families. The inn was popular amongst drag queens, transgender individuals, butch lesbians, and male sex workers. It also attracted LGBT people of color due to the fact many colored homosexuals were excluded from the community. On June 28, 1969, the Stonewall Inn was raided. Police roughed up the patrons and forced them into the paddy wagons. For the next 6 days, the raid received more attention, and 500 members of the LGBT community began to commit violent protests. The Stonewall Riots was a pivotal moment for the LGBT community in New York, which later spread across major cities in America. It paved the path towards equality for rights to express their sexual orientation, preference for clothing, and employment. The 1960s was the dawn of a changing era. Social and cultural changes were being incorporated into the new age, such as the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, and most importantly, the gay rights movement. Many young men and women broke free from their traditional roles of being housewives and family men to pursue their own interests, and so did members of the LGBT.
I've been trying to get up here all day for your gay brothers and your gay sisters in jail that write me every motherfucking week and ask for your help. And you all don't do a goddamn thing for them.
In New York, it was not only illegal to be openly gay, but socially unacceptable. LGBT youths were thrown out of their own homes or sent to mental hospitals to be cured of homosexual preferences or ideas. Those in the workforce were fired if their employer found out of their sexual orientation. Gay men and women were also discharged from military service if their sexuality was revealed.
I was in the Navy when I was 17, and it was there that I discovered that I was gay. Homosexuality was a dishonorable discharge in those days, and you couldn't get a job afterwards.
Due to the age of McCarthyism and the Red Scare, many Americans feared communism rising in America. As a result, New York City and the government officials created a list of security threats in which homosexuals were placed on a list, deemed as sex perverts and supporters of communism. Identifying as anything besides your biological sex was also rejected from society. Trans men and women were often declared as sexual deviants or fetishizers, perhaps because they were different in their self-perception and were willing to express their individualism. They were considered outcasts from society.
No legitimate right to really even exist as gay people.
Before the riots, the LGBT community were depicted as criminals. Police would perform inspections in cities, beaches, and neighborhoods in intent to rid of homosexuals. Aside from being classified as a crime, homosexuality was presumed to be a mental illness. Many LGBT youths were sent to mental hospitals to be converted. They faced brutal amounts of electroconvulsive therapy and were forced to have intercourse with the opposite sex.
In those days, what they would do, these psychiatrists, is they would try to talk you into being heterosexual. If that didn't work, they would do things like aversive conditioning, show you pornography, and then give you an electric shock.
Gay liberation was already underway before Stonewall Riots. In the San Francisco New Year's ball raid in January 1965, 6 homophile groups met up and essentially fought to establish the right of homosexuals and all adults to assemble lawfully without invasion of privacy. The Stonewall Riots happened during the end of 1960s. This sparked the continuity of the gay rights movement. At first, the Stonewall Inn was raided due to several reports claiming the inn sold alcohol without a license. In resistance, a few patrons blocked the exits, refusing to let the officers out. Many were infuriated by how the police were handling fellow patrons and decided to fight back, including Marsha P. Johnson, who later became a gay liberation activist. Patrons continued to throw miscellaneous items from bricks to coins and bottles to garbage. Police dragged some of the patrons into the street and started beating them. One of the patrons, named Stormy DeLavery, told one of the officers that her handcuffs were too tight, and the officer hit her head with his baton. According to Deputy Inspector Seymour Pine, a large crowd had formed in the square after the police had forced patrons out the door. As the chaos began to get worse, the police called the Tactical Patrol Force for reinforcements. The riots had ended that night, but the protests continued for another 5 days. Although no one was killed, 13 people were arrested and many survivors were severely injured. Patrons were afraid they would be cast on the evening news since they feared family and employers would discover their sexual orientations. Their personal privacy was ignored by local officials and law enforcement officers. In efforts to break up the location of their communal meetings, the bar was continuously raided once a month. Some short-term effects were that the money, skills, and recruits went toward to building the aid service, as gays were more involved. There was a dramatic increase in the level of organization and visibility of gay people of color. They were also able to earn the right to assemble lawfully without invasion. The Stonewall Riots resulted to new economic opportunities for gay-oriented businesses such as bars, bathhouses, discos, restaurants, etc. They were able to get constraints on police harassment. They also earned the right to publish LGBT magazines. The Stonewall Riots served as a catalyst for gay rights organizations that were formed across America, such as the Gay Activist Alliance, the Gay Liberation Front, and the Lavender Menace. These groups led pride marches and protested against persecution towards the LGBT community in Chicago, New York, Berkeley, and other major cities. In 1973, the American Psychology Association removed homosexuality from their list of mental illnesses. In more recent years, the Supreme Court deemed that gay marriage bans were unconstitutional, and since then, the LGBT community has gotten more representation in media. Award-winning movies such as Moonlight and Love, Simon showcase young men and their struggle in discovering their sexuality. Popular shows with a younger demographic such as Steven Universe, Auntie Mac, and The Legend of Korra explore gender and sexuality expression, teaching children and teenagers that it's okay to be different.
Cyrus, do you like Andy? You like Jonah.
Shamus Kelly, a member of the LGBT community, says it normalizes these relationships to impressionable young minds and helps those who do end up identifying as LGBTQ discover themselves. As of June 24, 2016, the Stonewall Inn became the first LGBT monument to be recognized as a Nation Historic Landmark. It brought together lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and trans people who just wanted to live their lives as themselves. The patrons were tired of being abused by society and wanted to snap back. Retaliating led to severe injuries, and some of the patrons were fired, arrested, harassed, and excluded from close friends and family. Without these riots, American society as a whole would have took longer to show acceptance toward the LGBT community.